A 47-year-old fisherman named Roy Harris was known by everyone in the small town of Meadow Springs, Louisiana, for his quiet demeanor and unshakable routine. Every morning, at the break of dawn, he'd set out in his weathered boat, casting his nets into the deep, murky waters of the Mississippi River. But one particular morning in late spring, something would catch his eye, something that would pull him from his usual path and into a mystery that no one, not even the most seasoned investigators, would be able to explain. It was an object half submerged in the mud, reflecting a strange metallic gleam under the dim sunlight. At first, Roy thought it was just debris, perhaps part of an old boat or abandoned equipment. But as he neared it, his instincts told him something was off. He reached for it. When the authorities arrived and saw what was inside, they froze in shock. "Would you dare to pull it? Make sure you subscribe and stay with us for the rest of the story." Roy Harris had lived his entire life by the river. At 47, his hands were rough, permanently etched with small scars from hooks, nets, and weather that refused to give him a day off. Meadow Springs was a small town where everyone's business was known, and yet Roy remained the kind of man people trusted, even if they didn't know much about what lay in the deeper parts of his mind. His daily ritual was as consistent as the tide. He would leave before sunrise, his small aluminum boat loaded with his nets, a dented thermos of coffee, and the quiet hope that the river would be kind to him that day. That morning felt no different at first. The fog still hovered low over the river, clinging to the banks like a warning. The birds were louder than usual, their cries echoing through the air as Roy launched his boat from the muddy dock, the engine humming its low, comforting growl. The Mississippi River was a lifeline for the town, but it was also a place of secrets, of things lost and never found again. Roy knew that better than most. He had seen cars pulled from its depths, driftwood that looked like twisted bodies, and sometimes he'd find personal items caught in his nets. A child's shoe, an old locket, pieces of someone's forgotten history. That morning, Roy planned to check the deeper bends near the willow groves. Those spots were tricky. The current pulled strangely there, and thick patches of underwater vegetation could tangle nets for hours. But it was also where the bigger catfish liked to rest, and Roy needed a good catch to sell at the dockside that weekend. The town was preparing for its annual river festival, and people would pay well for fresh fish to fry during the gatherings. The river felt particularly quiet as Roy cut the engine and let the boat drift toward the shaded bend. He prepared his nets, letting the heavy lead lines sink into the darkness below, the small orange buoys bobbing lazily as they marked the edges of his spread. Sipping coffee, he watched the water, listening to the subtle lapping against the hull, waiting for the subtle signs of movement, the telltale dip of a buoy that meant something living had gotten itself tangled. Then he noticed it. At first it was just a flicker, a small glint of light reflecting from something barely visible beneath the slow-moving surface. Roy squinted, leaning over the side, his eyes scanning the water carefully. It was stuck between the thick reeds and silt, half buried and almost perfectly camouflaged by the mud and drifting plants around it. He thought it might be a piece of scrap metal, maybe part of an old outboard motor someone had dumped years ago. The river was full of trash, and finding odd objects was part of the job. But there was something about the way it sat, the way the light caught the corners, that made Roy pause. It wasn't the shape of an engine part or a piece of broken machinery. It was more like a box, rectangular but with rounded edges, and it looked old, very old. The metal was dark, almost black, with patches of greenish corrosion, like copper that had been left to the elements for far too long. Roy felt a strange pull in his gut, a tightening that made him hesitate. His instincts, the ones built from years on the river, were telling him to leave it alone. Objects found in the river often carried stories, and sometimes those stories were better left submerged where they belonged. But curiosity is a heavy anchor, and for Roy, it was heavier than caution that morning. He reached for the boat hook, carefully maneuvering it into the water, trying to nudge the object free from the reeds without stirring up too much mud. The water clouded quickly, turning from a murky green to a thick brown, swallowing the object from view. Roy bit his lip, adjusting his position in the boat to keep his balance as he pulled. The object was heavier than he expected, resisting with a stubbornness that suggested it had been in that spot for a very long time. A sudden tug nearly pulled the boat hook from his hands, and Roy had to brace his foot against the side of the boat to keep from toppling overboard. His breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding as he felt the object shift under the water. The reeds tore away with a wet ripping sound, and bubbles rose to the surface, popping with a foul, earthy smell that made Roy wrinkle his nose. Slowly, inch by inch, the object began to rise, breaking the surface of the river with a thick, sucking sound. Water cascaded off its edges, dark mud dripping down its sides like blood from a wound. Roy's eyes widened as he finally saw it clearly. It was a chest, an old, iron-banded chest, about the length of a man's torso, with heavy handles on each side and a thick, rusted lock securing the front. He let the boat hook clatter to the bottom of the boat, reaching out with his hands instead, the cold metal biting into his palms as he pulled it over the edge of the boat, letting it drop onto the wooden floor with a heavy thud that echoed across the silent river. The sound seemed to ripple through the fog, sending a flock of birds screeching into the sky from the nearby trees. Roy stood over the chest, breathing heavily, his hands shaking slightly as he wiped the mud off the top with the edge of his sleeve. The lock was ancient, rusted so badly that Roy wondered if it would crumble under the weight of a hammer. The chest itself was pitted and scarred, the wood swollen and cracked from years underwater, but somehow it had remained intact, sealed, keeping whatever was inside hidden from the world. The river lapped against the sides of the boat, almost as if reminding him that he was alone out here, miles away from the nearest dock, with nothing but the low hum of insects and the distant call of crows to keep him company. Roy felt the weight of the chest, not just in its physical form but in the mystery it carried. What was it doing here, buried under mud and reeds in a bend of the river that only a few locals bothered to fish in? Who had put it here, and why? He sat down on the edge of the boat, staring at the chest, the early morning sunlight finally breaking through the fog and reflecting off the small patches of exposed metal. Roy knew he couldn't open it here, not in the middle of the river where a single wave could send it back into the depths. But he also knew he couldn't just leave it. His instincts, the same ones that told him to leave it alone, were now screaming at him to take it back, to find out what secrets it held. Roy decided to finish his nets quickly, pulling them in with practiced movements, ignoring the smaller fish that flopped in the bottom of the boat. His focus was entirely on the chest now, and he felt a growing tension in the pit of his stomach, a sense that something had changed the moment he pulled it from the water. It was as if the river itself was watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. With the nets packed away, Roy turned the boat around, the chest sitting heavily near the bow, its presence almost suffocating in the small space. Every bump of the boat against the water made the chest shift slightly, a dull thud that seemed louder than it should have been. As he guided the boat back toward the dock, Roy couldn't help but glance over his shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see someone standing on the banks, watching him, waiting for him to return. But there was no one. The river was empty, as it always was in the early hours, and the town of Meadow Springs was still waking up as Roy pulled the boat onto the trailer and secured the chest under an old tarp, weighing down the edges with ropes to keep it from shifting during the drive back to his small, weathered house on the outskirts of town. Even as he drove, the questions spun in his mind. What was inside? Could it be valuable, or was it something dangerous, something meant to stay hidden forever? Why did he feel like the chest was more than just a discovery, that it was the beginning of something he wasn't ready for? When Roy arrived home, the morning sun was higher, and the birds were quiet, replaced by the hum of cicadas in the thick summer air. He backed the trailer into the small shed beside his house, carefully pulling the tarp away to reveal the chest, still slick with mud and river water. He stood there for a long moment, just staring, the weight of his decision pressing down on him as he reached for the crowbar hanging on the wall. Taking a deep breath, Roy wedged the crowbar under the edge of the lock, pressing down with a slow, steady force. The rust protested, groaning as it resisted, but with a final, sharp crack, the lock snapped, falling to the ground in pieces. Roy's heart pounded in his chest as he reached for the heavy iron handle, lifting the lid slowly, the hinges creaking in protest as the seal of mud and age broke. He lifted the lid fully, the sunlight streaming into the dark interior, and for a moment, Roy could only stare, unable to process what he was seeing inside the chest that had been hidden beneath the river mud for what looked like decades, if not longer. Inside the chest, what Roy saw almost made his breath catch in his throat. The contents were unlike anything he could have ever expected. Piled high in the chest were old yellowed papers, their edges frayed and curling as if they had been trapped in the damp for years. But these were not the kind of documents one might expect to find locked away, hidden in the depths of a river. No, these were far more sinister. The pages were filled with scrawled writing, some in languages Roy didn't recognize, others in a delicate script that resembled Old French, the letters looping with an elegant precision that felt wrong. What caught Roy's attention first, however, was the shape of the object beneath the papers. It was a small wooden box, delicately carved with intricate patterns that looked almost like symbols, ancient and unfamiliar. As he reached for it, Roy noticed a faint smell, like something old, damp, and forgotten, rising from the chest. The smell clung to his skin, to the air around him, as if the very contents of the box were somehow alive with history. Carefully, Roy lifted the wooden box, brushing off the dust and grime that had collected on it. As his fingers grazed the smooth surface, a shiver ran down his spine. The box felt warm, as though it had been recently handled, and that fact alone made Roy's unease grow. He wasn't sure why, but something about the box seemed wrong, as though it had been waiting for him specifically to find it. He hesitated for a long moment before prying open the small, rusted clasp. The lid creaked as it lifted, and inside, nestled in layers of faded velvet, lay a strange, glimmering object. It was a stone, or rather, it appeared to be a stone, but it had a strange sheen to it, almost like it was made of metal. The surface was smooth, flawless, but it pulsed with an eerie, faint glow that made Roy's heart race. He didn't touch it, not immediately. Instead, he stared at it, his breath slow and deliberate. The room felt colder, the air thicker, as though the stone was drawing all warmth and light into itself. Roy's mind spun in circles as he tried to process what he was seeing. Was it some kind of artifact? A relic? He had heard stories, of course, about hidden treasures, cursed objects, and ancient secrets buried in places like the river, but this was something entirely different. What was it? Roy's fingers twitched as he considered reaching for it, but instinctively, he knew better. The stone was not something to be handled lightly. It was something far beyond his understanding. He closed the lid of the wooden box gently, but the strange glow from inside seemed to linger, casting a faint light on his hands as they hovered over it. Roy stared at the chest for a moment longer, the tension in his chest building, the silence of the room heavy with unanswered questions. Was he even supposed to have found this? Should he just leave it be, bury it back in the river where it had been hidden for so long? Or was it his fate to uncover whatever dark secret it held? A ringing sound suddenly filled his ears, dragging him out of his trance. His phone. He glanced down at it, the screen flashing with a call from his old friend, Deputy Earl Jenkins. Roy's heart skipped a beat. Earl had always been a no-nonsense guy, someone who didn't tolerate any nonsense. If he was calling, it was serious. Roy answered quickly, his voice a little shaky. "Earl, what's going on?" The voice on the other end of the line sounded tense. "Roy, I need you to listen closely. We've got something going on down by the river, near your usual spot. You need to stay away from there, understand? Stay at home. Don't go anywhere near it." Roy frowned. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "I can't say too much, but trust me, it's not good," Earl replied, his tone urgent. "Just stay where you are. We're sending a couple of officers over to your place to check in with you. We'll explain everything when we get there. But for now, don't touch anything, Roy. Understand?" Roy's heart raced as he stood in the shed, staring at the chest in front of him. "Yeah, I understand. I'll be here." He hung up the phone, his mind racing. Something was happening down by the river. Was it related to what he had just discovered? He glanced back at the chest, his gut telling him there was more at play here than he could comprehend. It was no coincidence that he had found it. It never was with the river. The next few minutes felt like hours. Roy stood frozen, his eyes glued to the wooden box in front of him, unable to shake the feeling that he had just unlocked something he wasn't meant to understand. His fingers trembled as he reached for the chest again, lifting it carefully and setting it aside. He moved quickly to clean the area around him, wanting to cover up the traces of what he had uncovered. But even as he moved, the strange glow from the box seemed to linger, faintly illuminating the small shed. And then, he heard the unmistakable sound of sirens, the heavy hum of the police car approaching his driveway. He froze, a sense of dread filling him as he set the chest down one last time, glancing toward the door of the shed. The deputies arrived just a few minutes later, a familiar white and blue cruiser pulling into the gravel driveway. Roy knew Earl had already informed them of the situation. His friends were here, but this was different. He could feel it in the air, in the way the officers stepped carefully out of the car and moved toward him, their faces grim. Earl was the first to speak, his eyes flickering to the shed before meeting Roy's gaze. "You found something, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. Roy nodded, his chest tightening. "Yeah, I found something in the river." Earl sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I knew it. Look, Roy, we've got a mess on our hands, and it's not just some old relic. You need to come with us. We've got more people coming down, and I'm going to need you to stay quiet about all of this." Roy felt a rush of panic. "What's going on, Earl? What's happening by the river?" Earl shook his head. "I wish I could tell you. Just trust me. You don't want to be involved any more than you already are." Roy swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the secret pressing on him, suffocating him. He didn't know what to say, and the look in Earl's eyes told him he didn't want to know. The deputies moved cautiously toward the shed, and Roy stepped back, his gaze shifting nervously between the officers and the chest inside. Was it really a relic of some ancient civilization, or was there something far darker and more dangerous hidden within it? Before he could ask another question, the officers made it clear that he needed to come with them. They needed to investigate what he had found, and soon. The air in the shed seemed to grow heavier, as though it too was waiting for an answer. Roy took a deep breath. He had no choice now. He had discovered something that no one else was supposed to find. The deputies made their way inside, but Roy's thoughts couldn't escape the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he had bargained for. Roy sat in the back of the cruiser, the window down halfway, letting in the thick, humid Louisiana air that clung to his skin. The road back toward the river was quiet, lined with cypress trees draped in moss, their branches swaying gently as if they were whispering secrets to one another. Earl drove in silence, his jaw tense, eyes darting to the rearview mirror every so often, as if to make sure Roy hadn't vanished or changed his mind. They arrived at the river bend where Roy had found the chest, but it was no longer the quiet, isolated place it had been that morning. Several vehicles were parked along the muddy bank, some marked with the sheriff's department insignia, others unmarked, dark SUVs with tinted windows that gave Roy a cold, uneasy feeling in his gut. Men and women in dark uniforms moved methodically around the area, setting up yellow tape and equipment near the water's edge. "What's all this, Earl?" Roy asked, his voice low, not sure if he wanted to hear the answer. Earl sighed, pulling the cruiser to a stop. "Roy, we've had reports over the years of strange activity around here. People going missing, lights over the river at night, sounds in the woods. We could never prove anything, and folks just chalked it up to stories. But then you pulled that chest out." Roy looked at him, confusion etched across his tired face. "You think the chest is connected to all of that?" Earl opened the door, stepping out into the heat, the cicadas buzzing like electricity in the trees. "I don't know what I think, but some folks higher up seem to believe it's worth looking into. They showed up faster than I could blink when I mentioned what you found." Roy stepped out of the cruiser, the mud sucking at his boots as he followed Earl toward the water. A man in a dark suit with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp eyes approached them, holding a small notebook in his hand. "Mr. Harris, my name is Agent Lockwood," the man said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, almost painfully so. "I understand you're the one who discovered the chest in the river." Roy nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah, I found it while I was working my nets." Lockwood's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Roy as if trying to read his thoughts. "We need to know exactly where you found it and if you noticed anything unusual before or after you retrieved it." Roy took a deep breath, recounting the morning in detail, the glint in the water, the struggle to free it, the foul bubbles rising to the surface, and the heavy weight of the chest as he dragged it into his boat. Lockwood listened without interrupting, his pen moving quickly across the notepad. "And the contents of the chest?" Lockwood asked finally, looking up. Roy hesitated, his mind flashing back to the strange glow of the stone, the warmth that shouldn't have been there, and the papers filled with strange writing. There were papers, old ones, and a small wooden box with something inside. I didn't recognize it. Lockwood's eyes flickered for a moment, a flash of something that looked like recognition. Or was it fear? Before his expression returned to its calm, professional mask. "We will need to take the chest and its contents for examination, Mr. Harris." Roy's jaw tightened. It's in my shed. I didn't know what to do with it. Lockwood nodded, signaling to another agent nearby, who immediately began speaking into a radio. Thank you for your cooperation. I suggest you remain available should we need to speak with you further. As Lockwood turned to walk away, Roy grabbed his arm, a surge of frustration breaking through his caution. What is it? What's in that box? Why are you all here? Lockwood paused, glancing down at Roy's hand before looking him directly in the eye. Some things, Mr. Harris, are better left unknown. With that, he pulled away, leaving Roy standing on the riverbank, the sound of the water lapping against the shore, mixing with the low hum of the agent's equipment and radios. Earl placed a hand on Roy's shoulder, giving him a look that said he didn't have any more answers than Roy did. They returned to Roy's house just as a convoy of dark SUVs arrived, agents filing out and heading toward the shed. Roy watched helplessly as they opened the doors. Two men carefully lifting the chest and carrying it out with the precision of people who had done this many times before. Another agent followed behind them, holding the small wooden box with gloved hands, placing it carefully into a padded case before securing it inside one of the vehicles. The shed, once filled with the comforting smell of river mud and bait, now felt empty, hollow. Roy stood in the doorway, staring at the empty space where the chest had sat, the faint outline of mud on the floor, the only sign it had ever been there. Earl cleared his throat. I'm sorry, Roy. I didn't want it to go like this. Roy shook his head slowly. What are they going to do with it? Earl sighed, looking away. Whatever they need to do. This is bigger than us, Roy. As the last of the vehicles pulled away, the quiet of the Louisiana evening settled in, the cicadas' song returning as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Roy sat on the steps of his porch, the day's events replaying in his mind. The image of the glowing stone burned into his memory. He didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside his window made him jump. The rustle of the wind through the trees, the hoot of an owl, the distant splash of something in the river. He felt as if the darkness outside was pressing in, watching him, waiting. At around 3 in the morning, Roy finally stood, walking to the window to look out over the river in the distance. The moonlight reflected off its surface, creating a silver path across the water. But as he watched, he noticed something odd. A faint glow beneath the surface, moving slowly, like a lantern drifting underwater. His breath caught as he squinted, trying to see more clearly. The glow moved closer to the shore, then stopped, hovering just beneath the surface, pulsing faintly. Roy's mind raced. Was it the same glow he had seen from the stone? Or was it something else entirely? Without thinking, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, the cool night air washing over him as he made his way down the narrow path toward the riverbank. Each step felt heavier, the air growing colder the closer he got to the water. The glow was still there, pulsing, almost like it was calling to him. He reached the edge of the river, the mud sucking at his boots as he stepped closer, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness to reveal nothing. The glow was gone, the water still and silent, reflecting the stars above. Roy stood there for a long time, the chill seeping into his bones, before finally turning back toward his house. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, that something was watching him from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Back inside, Roy sat in his chair, staring at the floor, the image of the glowing stone and the pulsing light in the river dancing in his mind. What had he unleashed by pulling that chest from the river? Was it a relic of the past, or was it something much older, something that had been waiting for centuries to be found? He didn't know, and that was what terrified him the most. If you were in Roy's place, would you have opened that chest? Or would you have left it buried beneath the river forever? What do you think the glow in the river really was? Drop your theories and thoughts in the comments below. Your insights might be the key to understanding what Roy found. And if you're captivated by this unfolding mystery, smash the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this chilling real-life mystery. We have many more hidden stories to uncover together. The days after the chest's discovery passed slowly, stretching out into an uneasy silence. Roy couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air around him felt thick with tension, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, that night, the feeling returned. It was almost as if he had been expecting it, had been waiting for the next step in whatever twisted chain of events had been set in motion the moment he pulled that chest from the river. But the real question gnawed at him. Was he in control of this? Or was he merely a pawn in something much bigger than himself? By the third day, Roy couldn't ignore the strange dreams any longer. They came with an intensity that shook him to his core, always beginning the same way. He was standing at the edge of the river, the water so still that it reflected the trees perfectly. But then, from beneath the surface, something began to rise. A large shape, long and twisted, something dark and shifting like the shadows of the river itself. The glow from before returned, only this time it was different. It was no longer faint, no longer a soft pulse. Now, it burned with an unsettling intensity, casting an eerie light over the water. Roy would always wake before he could see what the shape truly was, his heart racing, sweat slick on his forehead. Each time he felt like he was on the verge of discovering something monumental, something that would explain everything. But every time, it slipped away, like a dream fading when the morning light hit. The nightmares had left him restless and jumpy, glancing over his shoulder for shadows that weren't there, hearing things that couldn't be explained. The oppressive quiet of the river no longer felt peaceful. It felt like it was waiting, like the water itself was holding something that hadn't yet been revealed. But the strangest part, he couldn't stop thinking about the stone, the way it had pulsed in the box, how its glow seemed to call to him, beckoning with an ancient hunger he didn't understand. He had tried to forget about it, tried to move on with his life, but his thoughts always circled back. That evening, unable to sit still any longer, Roy decided to visit the river again, though he knew he was taking a risk. Earl had warned him not to return to the spot where the chest had been found. The authorities had sealed off the area after Roy's discovery, setting up a perimeter and insisting that no one go near it. They didn't want anyone poking around, especially after they had moved the chest to an undisclosed location for further analysis. But Roy couldn't help himself. He needed to know more. He arrived under the cover of dusk, the setting sun casting an orange glow over the water. The river seemed different somehow, the water darker, more opaque, as though it was hiding something beneath its surface. There were no patrol cars, no officers in sight, just the gentle lapping of water against the bank, the chirping of crickets, and the soft rustling of the trees in the wind. As he stepped down the familiar path to the water's edge, Roy's eyes scanned the area, instinctively searching for any sign of the strange glow he had seen. He didn't know what he was looking for, but the unease in his gut told him he was about to find something. And then, just as before, he saw it. A faint glow beneath the water, barely visible at first, shimmering like the reflection of a distant lantern. But this time it was brighter, more pronounced, as though it were drawing closer to the surface. The faint pulse echoed in the back of his mind, the same as before, sudden, unnerving, like a heartbeat too close to his own. Roy's hands shook as he reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, landing on the spot where the glow was strongest. There, just beneath the surface, something was moving. He took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to go any further. Something told him to turn around, to leave, to forget everything. But the pull was too strong. He needed to know what was hidden beneath that water. As he leaned forward, trying to catch a better glimpse, his foot slipped on the slippery bank, sending him stumbling into the mud. He caught himself on a tree, his flashlight skittering across the ground before coming to rest in the muck. The light bounced erratically, casting strange shadows against the water. But for a moment, Roy was paralyzed by what he saw. The glow had stopped. It was no longer pulsing, no longer moving toward the surface. But the water had changed. There, beneath the surface, Roy saw a shape. At first, it was just a shadow, long and serpentine, coiled beneath the murky depths. It was too far down to make out clearly, but it was unmistakably alive. A wave of nausea swept over Roy as he instinctively took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. Was it the stone he had seen inside the chest, or was it something else? Something that had been here long before the chest had arrived. Whatever it was moving, and it wasn't alone. The glow flared briefly again, this time bright enough to cast an eerie light across the surface of the river. As Roy squinted, he could make out what looked like other shapes beneath the water. Something dark, something metallic, possibly covered in mud and algae. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the glow faded again, leaving the water still and lifeless. Roy stood frozen, unsure of what to do. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. He was no longer alone in the river. There was something beneath its surface, something ancient, something waiting to be found. But what did it all mean? Why had the chest appeared when it did? What connection did it have to the river, to the strange creatures or forces hidden within its depths? He couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that the chest, the stone, the glowing shape, all of it was part of something bigger, something that stretched back through time. Before he could make a decision, a sound cut through the silence. The crackling of branches, the snap of twigs beneath a boot. Roy spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Earl stepped out from behind the trees, his eyes wide, his hand gripping the flashlight tightly. "Roy," he said, his voice tense, "you shouldn't be here. I told you." But Roy didn't hear him. He was staring at the river, the same sinking feeling in his stomach returning, as he realized something was emerging from the water. Something was coming up to meet them. What do you think Roy is about to encounter in the water? Was it part of the chest's curse, or is there something far worse hiding beneath the surface of the river? Let us know your theories and suspicions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you're intrigued by the unfolding mystery, and make sure to subscribe for more spine-tingling discoveries like this one. You won't want to miss the next chapter of this eerie journey. Roy's breath clouded in the humid night as he and Earl stood frozen on the muddy riverbank, staring at the black water as ripples moved outward in perfect circles. The glow returned, brighter now, illuminating the trunks of the cypress trees and the hanging moss with a ghostly light. The river's surface began to tremble, as if it were alive, and then something broke through the water with a slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't a creature, not exactly. At first, Roy thought it was a piece of debris, a log wrapped in riverweed, but as it rose higher, he saw the smooth metal edges beneath the muck. It was another chest, identical to the one he had found. Earl's flashlight beam shook violently as he struggled to keep it steady, the light reflecting off the dripping water and the tarnished metal of the chest. The glow pulsed from within the object, casting eerie shadows that danced across their faces, making Roy feel as if the shadows themselves were alive, whispering in languages he couldn't understand. "Roy, we need to get out of here," Earl said, but his voice was hollow, as if he didn't believe his own words. Roy stepped forward instead, compelled, unable to look away from the chest. The water around it steamed, hissing quietly, and the air was filled with the scent of wet earth and something else, something sharp and metallic that made Roy's eyes water. As the chest settled onto the muddy bank, the glow intensified, pushing back the darkness until it felt like the night itself was holding its breath, afraid to move. Roy knelt beside the chest, ignoring Earl's repeated calls for him to stop. His fingers, trembling, reached for the rusted lock. The lock, unlike the one before, crumbled at his touch, falling away into the mud as if it had never been whole. Roy swallowed, hearing the distant hum of the cicadas fall silent as he lifted the heavy lid, revealing the contents within. Inside was another stone, identical to the first, pulsing with that same hypnotic glow. Around it were more papers, soaked and almost illegible, covered in symbols that seemed to shift when Roy tried to read them. But there was something else this time, something that made Roy recoil in shock. Beneath the stone was a small, weathered photograph. The edges were curled, the image faded, but Roy could still see what it was. A black and white photo of a man standing on the same riverbank, holding a chest, smiling at the camera. But it wasn't just any man. It was Roy. He fell backward into the mud, the photograph dropping from his shaking hands. Earl rushed forward, grabbing Roy by the shoulders. "What is it? Roy, what did you see?" Roy couldn't speak, couldn't process the impossible reality before him. The photograph was old, decades old, but it was him. The same eyes, the same scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the same look of cautious hope he had when he first pulled the chest from the river. It was him, standing in the same place, holding the same chest. The glow from the stone pulsed once, twice, then flared so brightly that Roy had to shield his eyes. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground and up into Roy's bones, making his teeth ache. The river itself seemed to respond, the water trembling as ripples shot outward. Then, just as quickly as it started, the glow vanished, plunging the riverbank into silence and darkness. Earl's flashlight flickered, the beam catching the surface of the water, now calm, as if nothing had happened. But the chest was still there, the photograph lying in the mud, a silent testament to the impossible truth that Roy was now forced to accept. Earl knelt down, picking up the photograph, his eyes narrowing as he examined it under the flickering light. "Roy, how is this possible?" Roy shook his head, unable to answer, unable to think. The weight of the discovery pressed down on him, suffocating him with questions that had no answers. Why was there a photograph of him, decades old, with the same chest he had just found? Why was the river giving up these secrets now, after so many years of silence? The air grew colder, and Roy felt a shift around him, a subtle change that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was as if the river was alive, watching, waiting for his next move. He turned to Earl, his voice hoarse. "We need to leave, now." They lifted the chest together, the mud sucking at its weight as they carried it up the bank toward Roy's truck. Neither of them spoke as they secured it in the back, covering it with a tarp as the first drops of rain began to fall, the storm clouds rolling in across the moonlit sky. As Roy drove away from the river, his mind raced with questions. What was the connection between him and the chest? Was it fate that led him to it, or was he part of something far beyond his understanding, something that had been playing out long before he was born? The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the windshield as lightning split the sky, illuminating the road in brief flashes of white light. Roy's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles white, as he glanced in the rearview mirror at the covered chest. In that moment, he knew that this wasn't over. The chest, the stone, the river, none of it was finished with him. There were secrets within that chest that needed to be uncovered, truths that had been hidden for decades, perhaps centuries, waiting for the right moment to surface. Roy pulled into his driveway, the storm now in full force, the wind howling through the trees around his house. He and Earl carried the chest back into the shed, setting it down in the exact spot where the first one had been placed. The moment it touched the ground, the glow returned, faint but unmistakable, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. Roy and Earl stood over it, the storm raging outside, the glow casting long shadows against the walls. "What now?" Earl asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. Roy looked at him, the fear in his eyes replaced by a grim determination. "We open it." And together they lifted the lid once more. Inside, they found another layer beneath the stone, hidden beneath the velvet lining of the box. It was a compartment, sealed shut with small, intricate locks that looked ancient. Roy's hands moved automatically, finding the catches, lifting the lining, revealing what lay beneath. It was a map, old, hand-drawn, the paper yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. It showed the river, winding through the land, but there were markings along its banks, symbols matching those found on the papers in the chest. Circles, crosses, and strange glyphs marked specific locations along the river, each accompanied by a date. Some of the dates were from decades ago, some were from centuries past, and some were from the future. Roy and Earl exchanged a glance, the weight of the discovery settling in the room like a heavy fog. The river wasn't just a place of water and mud, fish and driftwood. It was a ledger, a map of something far larger, something that spanned across time itself, and Roy was somehow at the center of it. The storm outside raged on, but inside the shed, there was a strange calm as Roy traced his finger over the map, the glow from the stone reflecting in his eyes. The questions were still there, but now there was a path forward, a path that would lead him to the answers he desperately needed, no matter how terrifying they might be, because now there was no turning back. What do you think Roy has truly discovered? Is the river a gate to something beyond time? Or is Roy part of a mystery that repeats itself over centuries? Could you handle opening a chest that might change everything you believe about your reality? We want to hear your theories in the comments below. Let us know what you believe the truth behind the river's secret really is. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chilling story we bring you. Your support allows us to continue diving into the world's most mysterious and unsettling true stories, one discovery at a time. Would you dare to pull that chest from the river, knowing what might be inside? Leave your thoughts below, and we'll see you in the next story.